The stagecoach smelled of stale sweat, cheap tobacco, and the alkali dust that had forced its way through every crack in the worn leather curtains. For 6 days, Clara Jenkins had been pressed between a snoring Lutheran preacher and a land speculator who spat into a brass cup, and now her bones felt like they had been rattled loose inside her skin. The wheels struck a rock, jarring her teeth, and then, with a long groan of protesting wood, the coach slowed. She pulled back the curtain. There was no town to see. Not really, just a half-dozen leaning buildings of raw, unpainted lumber gathered on a patch of earth that looked scraped raw. The wind was the first thing she noticed when the driver hauled the door open. It did not blow. It scoured, carrying grit that stung her face. Clara clutched the handle of her small carpet bag, the woven fabric thin beneath her fingers. This was it. Promise. Wyoming territory. The name felt like a prayer she had been whispering for 1,000 miles. She straightened her spine, forcing a look of calm hope onto her face. It was a mask she had practiced in the reflection of dark windows, a look that hid the desperation that had pushed her to answer an advertisement from a man she had never met. She was the last one out. The preacher hurried toward the saloon. The speculator was already arguing with the driver about a piece of luggage. Clara stood alone, her worn and gray dress flapping hard against her legs. The wind was cold, much colder than she had expected. She stepped onto the boardwalk, her gaze searching for a face that might be looking for her. No one was. Men in muddy boots and broad hats passed without a glance. She approached the stage depot, which was also the general store and post office. The air inside was thick with the smell of coffee beans, axle grease, and cured meat. A man with a graying beard and a dirty apron stood behind the counter. "Help you?" he grunted. "Yes, thank you," Clara said, her voice sounding small and thin. "I am here to meet Mr. John Hargreaves. He sent for me." The man stopped what he was doing. He did not look up, but his hands, which had been weighing dried beans, went still. He looked past her, toward a woman in a gingham dress who was inspecting bolts of cloth. The woman met his eyes and her face tightened. Clara felt a cold sickness begin in her stomach. "Mr. Hargreaves?" she repeated. The man finally looked at her. His eyes were not unkind, but they were tired. "Ma'am, I am sorry to be the one to tell you. John Hargreaves is dead." Clara's hand, the one not holding the bag, went to her throat. The hope she had worn so carefully on her face cracked and fell away, leaving her bare. "Dead?" "Fever," the man said, turning back to his beans as if the conversation were over. "Took him fast. Put him in the ground a week ago. Last Tuesday." A week. She had been on the stagecoach for 6 days. He might have been alive when she left St. Louis. "Oh, the poor dear," the gingham-clad woman murmured. It was a soft sound, the kind of pity one gives to a stray dog just before shooing it away. It offered nothing. A teamster lounging by the cold pot-bellied stove spat a stream of tobacco juice into a nearby bucket. "Hargreaves," he drawled, looking Clara up and down with open scorn. "He was always sending for him. Seems his luck ran out. And yours too, Missy." Clara's face burned with a shame she did not understand. She was not a commodity. She was a woman seeking a respectable life. But here, in this room, she was just an unclaimed parcel. The man behind the counter, Mr. Abernathy, finally nodded. Like I said, dead. He had nothing else to offer. The indifference was worse than the scorn. It meant she did not exist. She backed out of the store, the little bell above the door tinkling mockingly. She stood on the boardwalk, the wind whipping her hair from its pins. The reality settled on her like a shroud. She had no money. Her ticket was one way. She knew no one in this territory, this continent of dust and sky. She had $7 and a change of clothes in her bag, and no way to go back. She stood there for a long time. The sun, a pale coin in the hazy sky. began to dip toward the brown, scrub-covered hills that surrounded the town like a prison wall. Men began to drift toward the saloon, the sound of a tinny piano starting up inside. The cold was no longer a chill. It was a physical pain, seeping into her thin dress. She had to do something. She saw a small sign. Sheriff. The office was a small box with a desk, a gun rack, and a man inside. He was a large man, his belly straining his vest, and his boots were propped up on his desk. He did not take them down when she entered.
"Sheriff?"
He looked at her, his eyes flat and bored. "Ma'am." Clara recited her story again, her voice trembling this time. "The stagecoach, Mr. Hargreaves, the fever, the fact that she was alone. I do not know what to do. I have no funds, no place to stay." The sheriff chewed on a matchstick, rolling it from one side of his mouth to the other. He let the silence stretch, looking at her as if she were a complicated but uninteresting piece of paperwork. Finally, he dropped his boots to the floor with a thud. "Ma'am, your arrangement with Mr. Hargreaves was a personal one. It was not a legal matter for this town. He's dead. That's the end of it. But surely there is some help. A church? A ladies' aid society?" "Ain't no ladies' aid," he said, standing up. He was a mountain of a man, and he used his size to end the conversation, walking to the door and holding it open. The wind howled in. "The town ain't responsible for you. You are not my problem." Tears of pure, cold panic pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She walked back into the twilight, defeated. There was only one place left with lights on, the saloon. She paused at the swinging doors, her hands shaking. To enter such a place alone was to forfeit what little reputation she had left. But the cold was biting through her clothes, and the alternative was to freeze to death on the boardwalk. She pushed the doors open. The noise hit her like a physical blow. Laughter, shouting, the clink of glasses, and the pounding piano. The air was blue with smoke. Every man in the room, cowboys, ranchers, teamsters, and men who looked to have no trade at all, stopped and turned to look at her. The silence that fell was heavy, assessing, and hungry. Clara kept her eyes down. She saw a woman behind the bar, her red dress cut low, her face painted and tired. Clara moved toward her, trying to make herself invisible to the stairs.
"What'll it be?"
the barmaid asked, her voice like gravel.
"Please,"
Clara whispered, her throat tight.
"I am not here for that. I need work. Anything. I can scrub floors. I can wash glasses. I just need a place to sleep. A warm place."
The barmaid, whose name she later learned was May, looked her over. It was a long, slow appraisal, void of pity. "We ain't hiring."
"Please,"
Clara begged, the tears finally welling.
"I have nowhere to go. I will be gone by morning."
"Got a room, sweetheart?" A voice slurred from her right, a drunken ranch hand. His face flushed, leaned in close. He smelled of whiskey and cattle. "My room is warm. I will pay for your company." He put a heavy, greasy hand on her arm. Clara flinched, yanking her arm away as if she had been burned.
No, I am not. I am a decent woman."
The man laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Ain't no decent women in here. Honey, not after dark." May sighed, loud and annoyed.
"Silas, leave her be. She's not on the clock."
She looked back at Clara.
"The kitchen, in the back. There are some potato sacks by the stove, but you are out before the cook gets here at sunup."
"You understand?" "Yes, thank you. God bless you."
"He ain't got nothing to do with it,"
May muttered, and turned to pour another whiskey. Clara hurried through a small door behind the bar, escaping the cloud of smoke and the weight of the men's eyes. The kitchen was dark, but a little warmth radiated from the massive iron stove. She found the pile of burlap sacks in the corner, pulled them into a heap, and sank down, drawing her knees to her chest. She cried then, silent, racking sobs of failure and terror, burying her face in the rough material that smelled of dirt and damp. She did not know that, in the saloon's darkest corner, a man had watched the entire scene. He sat alone, a single glass of whiskey untouched on his table. His name was Eli. He was a solitary figure, known to the town but not part of it. He wore the clothes of a cowboy, but he did not work for any of the big ranches. He kept to himself, hunting and trapping in the mountains that shadowed the town. He had haunted eyes, the color of a winter sky, and they missed nothing. He had seen Clara step off the stage, seen her face crumple in the general store. He had watched her go to the sheriff's office and watched her be turned away. And he had watched her walk into the saloon, a mouse walking into a den of cats. He had seen Silas grab her, seen the panic in her eyes, and seen the barmaid relent. The men in the saloon gave Eli a wide berth. There were scars on him. One, a pale white line, ran from his temple down his neck, disappearing into his collar. The others were not visible, but the whole town knew they were there. He was a war survivor, though which side he had fought on, no one was quite sure. They said he was touched by darkness, a man who had seen too much and come back wrong. He sat in the shadows, and he watched Clara's humiliation, his face as still and hard as carved stone. He did nothing. He just watched. The night was the longest of Clara's life. The sounds of the saloon filtered through the wall, shouts, a crash of glass, a woman's high-pitched, false laugh. She did not sleep. She just waited for morning, her body aching with cold and tension. Before the first hint of gray light touched the sky, she was up. She folded the sacks neatly, though her hands were numb. She slipped out the back door of the kitchen into a frozen alley. The morning was brittle. A hard frost covered everything, glittering like crushed glass. The mud in the street had frozen into sharp, uneven ridges. Clara pulled her thin shawl tighter. She had no plan. She could not stay and promise. The encounter with the ranch hand had made that clear. She would be ruined or she would starve. She looked east, the way she had come. It was impossible. She looked west, toward the mountains. Also impossible. But she could not stay still. To stay still was to die. She began to walk. She walked out of the town, past the last building, her feet following the deep, frozen ruts of the stagecoach road. She had no destination. She was just walking away. The sun began to rise, a weak, watery light that did nothing to warm the air. The frost on the ground did not melt. It turned to a thick, clinging, icy mud that sucked at her feet. She was wearing her only good pair of shoes, thin-laced boots with leather soles. They were not made for this. She felt the stitching on the left sole give way. The cold mud seeped in instantly, soaking her stocking, chilling her to the bone. She stumbled, catching herself. She looked down. The sole was flapping, ruined. She stopped. She looked at the boot, at the endless, empty road ahead, at the hostile brown hills, and, for the first time, the hope that had carried her across the country truly died. She sank to her knees in the freezing mud, her small bag dropping beside her, and covered her face. She did not hear the horse until it was almost upon her. The hooves were slow, deliberate, muffled by the soft ground. She looked up, startled, wiping mud and tears from her face. It was the man from the saloon, the one from the shadows. He sat on a sturdy bay horse, looking down at her. His face was unreadable, weathered by sun and wind. He wore a heavy wool coat, and a rifle was sheathed in a scabbard by his knee. He did not look kind. He looked dangerous. He simply stopped the horse and waited. The silence was absolute, broken only by the horse snorting a cloud of steam into the cold air. This was the offer. The silence, the waiting. Clara stared at him, her heart pounding with a new, sharper fear. He was a stranger, a man with a dark reputation, alone on a deserted road. He was everything she had been warned about. She tried to stand, but her dress was heavy with mud and her legs were numb. She hesitated, trapped between the certainty of freezing to death and the unknown terror this man represented. He watched her struggle, his haunted eyes taking in the broken boot, the mud-caked dress, the despair on her face. His voice, when it came, was lower and rougher than she expected, like stones grinding together. It was the first time she had heard him speak. "You will die out here." It was not a threat. It was not an offer of pity. It was a fact, stated as plainly as the man in the store had stated that John Hargreaves was dead. And she knew it was the truth. She looked at her ruined boot, then back at his face. She could not speak. She gave a single, jerky nod. He did not dismount. He did not smile. He simply shifted his weight and held out a calloused, gloved hand. She took it. His grip was like iron. With one smooth, effortless pull, he hauled her up onto the horse, seating her sideways in front of him, her legs dangling. The ride was silent. She was pressed against his chest, her back to him. He smelled of wood smoke, pine, and cold iron. She could feel the solid warmth of him through her wet clothes. And it was terrifying and comforting all at once. She was so tired. She found her head slumping back against his shoulder. They did not go back to town. He turned the horse off the road and headed straight for the high, dark mountains that loomed to the west. Fear spiked in her again. Where was he taking her? But she was too cold and too exhausted to fight. She simply clung to the saddle horn and let it happen. They rode for nearly 2 hours, climbing a winding, narrow trail. The town disappeared behind them, hidden by ridges and low clouds. Just when she thought she could not hold on another minute, the trail opened into a small clearing. A cabin sat there. It was not a welcoming sight. It was remote, built of dark, heavy logs, and the wind seemed to hit it harder up here. It looked weather-worn, as if it were barely clinging to the side of the mountain. A plume of smoke rose from the stone chimney. He stopped the horse but did not speak. "Clara," her voice a frozen whisper, spoke the first words of the ride. She was not speaking to him. She was speaking to the universe, to the cold air, to the fact of her own existence. "I need a home." The man behind her was still for a long moment. She felt the rise and fall of his chest as he took a breath. He replied, his voice just as quiet, a low rumble against her back. "I need a wife." It was not a proposal of marriage. It was a transaction as stark and cold as the landscape. Her need met his. He swung his leg over the horse's rump, landing softly on the ground. He turned to her. Clara looked down at him, her eyes wide. She was stiff, frozen. He reached up. His large, gloved hands went to her waist, and then, gently, so gently it shocked her, he lifted her down from the horse. Her feet touched the ground, and her legs gave way immediately. He held her steady, keeping her from falling into the snow-dusted mud. For a second, they stood there. His haunted eyes looked into hers. Then he released her. He turned, walked to the heavy wooden door of the cabin, and pushed it open. He went inside without looking back, leaving the door open behind him. It was not an invitation. It was an answer. The air inside the cabin was cold. It was a still, dead cold that clung to the rough log walls and settled in the corners. It was a man's room, spare to the point of punishment. There was a narrow bed in one corner with a pile of gray blankets, a rough-hewn table, and one single, straight-backed chair. A massive stone fireplace dominated the far wall, its hearth black with soot. Clara stood just inside the door, dripping muddy water onto the floorboards. She clutched her small, soaked carpet bag. Eli walked past her without a word, his boots heavy on the floor. He went to the fireplace, knelt, and used a small shovel to clear the old ashes. He laid new kindling and wood with an economy of movement, striking a match. The flame caught, and a small, hungry fire began to crackle. It was the only sound besides the wind moaning outside. He did not look at her. He did not tell her where to sit or what to do. He had lifted her down, and that was the end of his obligation. Clara's body ached. She was frozen, and the mud on her dress was beginning to stiffen. She saw a wooden peg near the door. Slowly, she unwrapped her thin, wet shawl and hung it there. She placed her bag on the floor beside it, a pathetic, sodden lump. She felt like a stray dog he had allowed in from the rain, one he might kick out at any moment. To be useless was to be disposable. She knew this. She had to earn the warmth of that small, growing fire. She saw a broom made of bound twigs leaning against the wall. She picked it up. She began to sweep the floor, starting at the far wall and moving toward the hearth. She swept around the legs of the table, around the single chair. Eli had moved to the table and was disassembling his rifle, laying the oiled pieces on a scrap of leather. He did not seem to notice her. The cabin was not filthy, just neglected. It was the home of someone who did not care about comfort, only survival. She swept up dust, bits of dried mud, and pine needles. When the floor was clean, she looked for other tasks. There was a small stack of tin plates and cups near a dry sink. She found a bucket, and Eli motioned with his head toward the door. She took the bucket outside to a creek she had heard gurgling nearby, the water so cold it burned her hands. She washed the dishes. She wiped down the table. She found a ripped wool shirt slung over the back of the chair. It was torn at the elbow. She hesitated, then took her small sewing kit from her bag. She sat on the floor by the fire, as close as she dared, and began to mend it. Her fingers were numb, and her stitches were uneven, but it was work. Eli watched her. She felt his eyes on her hands, on the needle flashing in the firelight. When she finished, she folded the shirt and laid it on the edge of his bed. He grunted. It was not thanks, but it was acknowledgement. That night, he just ushered to the bed. "You sleep there." Clara stared at him. Where will you be?" He took one of the gray blankets, walked to the other side of the hearth, and spread it on the floor. He lay down with his back to her, fully clothed, his rifle beside him. She slept in the bed, still in her damp dress, too afraid to remove any of it. She did not sleep well. The bed smelled of him, of pine and iron, and a faint, lingering sorrow she could not name. The days settled into a quiet, harsh routine. She cooked. There was not much to cook with. He had sacks of flour, beans, salt, and coffee. He had jerked venison hanging from the rafters. She made bean soup and hard biscuits. He ate without comment. The first time she served the meal, she ladled soup into 2 bowls. She placed one on the table, motioning for him to take the single chair. He ignored her, taking his bowl and standing by the window to eat, looking out at the mountains. Clara sat in the chair, alone at the table. It felt wrong. The next night, she did the same, and again he stood. The third night, she placed his bowl on the table and her own. She stood opposite him, waiting. He looked at her, his eyes dark. "Sit. It is your chair, Mr. Eli." "Sit," he repeated. "Not while you stand." A muscle jumped in his jaw. She thought for a moment he might strike her or throw her out. He stared at her. A long, hard silence. Then he turned, grabbed a low, sturdy wooden crate from a corner, and set it on the other side of the table. He sat on it. From then on, they ate together at the table, he on his crate, she in her chair. They ate by the light of one tallow candle. The flickering light softened the hard lines of his face and made the small cabin feel even smaller. Isolated from the entire world, the wind howled, a constant, lonely scream. Their conversation was as sparse as the room. "More soup?" she would ask. "Yes," or he would say, "The wood is low," and she would bundle up and go to the woodpile, her arms aching as she carried the logs back. Their glances would sometimes meet across the table. His were guarded, impossible to read. Hers were searching, looking for the man beneath the silence. One afternoon, while he was out checking traps, She decided to scrub the floorboards. She used the harsh lye soap she found and a stiff brush near the fireplace, where he kept his rifles racked against the wall. She found the stains. They were dark, almost black in the dim light, but she knew what they were. They were old, soaked so deep into the wood grain that no amount of scrubbing would lift them. The pattern was a spatter, as if something had fallen and bled. She scrubbed, her knuckles raw, but the stains remained, a permanent, dark memory in the wood. When Eli returned, he saw her staring at the spot, the wet brush in her hand. He stopped, his eyes going from her face to the floor. He knew exactly what she was looking at. His face, already hard, became granite. Clara dropped her eyes. She did not ask. She did not want to know what or who had bled on his floor. She dried the spot and never tried to clean it again. The nights were the worst. She had moved to a pallet of blankets he had given her near the hearth, giving him back his bed. She preferred the floor. The fire kept the worst of the chill away. She was drifting in a shallow sleep when the sound tore her awake. It was a man's voice, choked and full of terror.
"Water. God, no. Leave him be. I said fall back."
She sat bolt upright, her heart pounding in her throat. The fire was low, casting monstrous shadows. Eli was tangled in his blankets, thrashing. He was not in the cabin. He was somewhere else, somewhere terrible.
"Hold the line!"
he shouted, his voice cracking with a pain that was not physical.
Mr. Eli?
She whispered, terrified. He went silent. Then he sat up, breathing like a winded horse. His eyes were wide and blank, staring at the wall.
"Mr. Eli, are you all right?"
He turned his head slowly. In the gloom, she saw the moment his mind came back from that other place. His gaze focused on her, and it was cold, full of shame and anger.
"It is nothing,"
he groaned, his voice a rasp. "Go back to sleep. Do not speak of it." He lay back down, turning his back to her, but she knew he was not sleeping. She lay awake for hours, listening to the rigid silence. He never spoke of the war. The next day, she tried, You were a soldier." He was cleaning his rifle, his hands moving with practiced, violent grace. He did not look up. "We do not talk about that. But at night, I said," he snapped, and this time he did look up, his eyes a winter storm. "We do not talk about it, not ever." The door was slammed shut, but the nightmares continued. Almost every night. They were a third person in the cabin, a wounded ghost that lived in Eli's sleep. She knew what it was to have ghosts. Hers were awake. A few nights later, the silence between them felt heavier than the snow piling up outside. She was darning a pair of his wool socks, the firelight catching the red in her hair. She had to fill the quiet, or it would swallow her. She spoke to the fire, her voice low. "My father, he was a man who liked his drink more than his family. He had debts. When I was 16, he sold my hand in marriage to a merchant in St. Louis." Eli, sitting on his crate, did not move. He was whittling a piece of wood, the knife blade rising and falling. "He was not a good man," Clara continued, her needle pausing. "This merchant, he had soft hands. He always smelled of bay rum, and he had a hard fist." She stopped. The memory was a cold stone in her stomach. She forced herself to go on. "He liked to correct me for burning the bread, for not smiling, for being too quiet." Eli's knife stilled. "I was with child, his child." She took a long, shaky breath. "One night, he was angry about, I do not even remember what, he hit me, in the stomach. I lost the baby. It was a girl, I think." A tear traced a path down her cheek, and she wiped it away angrily. "It nearly killed me. The bleeding. The doctor said I was damaged, that I might not have another. When the merchant heard, he sent me back to my father. Said I was faulty goods." She finished the sock,
her stitches tight and angry. My father was furious. He said I was ruined. That is why I answered Mr. Hargreaves's letter. No one would have me. I had to go somewhere. She finished her story, and there was only the sound of the wind. She felt ashamed, naked, having shown him the broken parts of her. Eli stared into the fire. The piece of wood in his hand was still. After a long minute, he spoke, his voice rough. Some men are animals. They deserve to be put down like one. He said nothing more, but when she went to get water the next morning, she found a stack of firewood outside the door, much larger than usual. He had cut it in the dark, after she had fallen asleep. A week later, a knock came at the door. It was so sudden. Clara gasped. Eli was on his feet in an instant, his hand on the rifle he kept by the door. He moved with a predator's speed. He opened the door a crack, blocking the inside with his body. An older man stood outside, his beard thick with ice. Eli, the man grunted. Got those pelts you wanted? Eli nodded, opened the door wider, and took a heavy canvas sack from the man. Got your trade, Eli said, pointing to a stack of furs tied with leather. The man, Mr. Langley, peered past Eli's shoulder, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He saw Clara, who was standing frozen by the hearth, her hands tightly clasped. Langley's sour face puckered in a look of knowing distaste. He let out a low chuckle. Well, I will be. See you found another stray. Eli, this one is prettier than the last one you had up here. Clara flinched as if he had hit her. Another stray. Eli did not move, but his entire body went rigid. He did not look at Langley. He stared out at the snow. Your goods are on the porch. Mr. Langley, he said. His voice was dangerously quiet, lower than the wind. Take them and go. Langley sensed the shift. The quiet in Eli was far more dangerous than shouting. No offense meant, the trapper muttered, backing up. Just an observation. Go! Langley grabbed his furs and scurried away. Eli watched him until he disappeared down the trail. He closed the door, the heavy thud echoing in the silence. He did not look at Clara. He did not explain who the last one was, and she did not ask. They ran low on flour and salt. The coffee was gone. Eli shoved a small deerskin pouch of coins into her hand. You have to go to town, he said. Me? The thought of it made her sick. They will not cheat you. They are afraid of me, he stated. Get what is on this list. Speak to no one. Come straight back. She bundled herself in her old shawl, the one he had given her feeling too much like a claim. The walk was miles, and the icy mud seeped into her mended boot, numbing her foot. She dreaded walking into the general store. Mr. Abernathy was there. Just as before, he saw her, and his eyes widened just slightly. He nodded, a purely businesslike gesture. As he was weighing the flour, the bell on the door tinkled. 2 women entered, the same 2 who had been there that first day. They saw Clara. They stopped. They moved to the far side of the store, by the bolts of cloth, and began to whisper. But their whispers were meant to be heard. That is her, the one who came for Hargreaves. Look at her, bold as brass. I heard she went right up the mountain with Eli Thorne, living with him in his cabin. Well, what else could she do? A woman with no morals. He must be paying her well for her services. Or maybe she was abandoned for a reason. Mr. Good Riddance. I say, we are a decent town. We do not need her kind. She is just his whore. The word hit Clara like a stone. Whore. Her face burned a violent, agonizing red. She felt the eyes of Mr. Abernathy on her, filled with a detached pity. She wanted to scream, to tell them about her father, about the merchant, about having nowhere to go. But she said nothing. She paid for the goods, her hands shaking so badly she dropped a coin. She snatched the heavy sack and fled the store, her head down. The long walk home was a blur of shame and tears.
The whispers seemed to follow her, carried on the wind, his whore, shameless, damaged goods. By the time she stumbled into the clearing, the tears were freezing on her cheeks. She burst through the cabin door, dropped the heavy sack on the table, and hurried to her pallet by the fire. She sank down, turning her back to Eli, and sobbed. She pulled her knees to her chest, hiding her face, her shoulders shaking. Eli had been cleaning his rifle. He stopped. He watched her. He saw her humiliation. Her small body curled in on itself as if shielding itself from blows. He said nothing. He did not go to her. He did not pat her shoulder or offer soft words. He did not know how. He just sat, watching her cry. His jaw set so hard it ached. Night fell. The cabin was filled with the sound of her weeping and the hiss of the fire. Finally, her sobs quieted. They ate their meal of beans and biscuits in a thick, choking silence. She could not meet his eyes. She felt soiled. After the plates were cleaned, she retreated back to her pallet, staring into the flames, feeling empty and cold. Eli stood by the window for a long time, looking out at the darkness. Then, with a heavy sigh, he turned. He walked to a large wooden chest in the corner of the room, one she had never seen him open. He lifted the lid. The scent of cedarwood filled the air. He pulled something out, a heavy fold of dark blue wool. He walked over to her. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. He was holding a shawl. It was not her thin, gray one. This was thick, beautifully woven, and soft. It looked warm. It looked expensive. Wordlessly, he unfolded it and draped it over her shoulders. The weight and warmth of it were immediate. It enveloped her, a solid, comforting presence. She instinctively clutched the edges, her fingers sinking into the soft wool. It smelled clean, of cedar and thyme. "It was," he started, his voice rough, then stopped. "It is warm. You will need it." He did not meet her eyes. He turned away abruptly, as if embarrassed. He went back to the table and sat on his crate. He pulled a fresh block of yellow pine from under the table and took out his whittling knife. Clara watched him, the heavy, warm shawl a fortress around her. In the flickering candlelight, she saw his hands, large and scarred, begin to move the blade. He was not whittling a small figure. He was carving a long, sturdy piece of wood. He was carving the leg of a chair, a second chair. The snow began in the night, a fine, whispering powder that coated the windowsills. By morning, the world outside was gone, erased by a silent, white ocean. The wind, which had been a constant moan, turned into a high, thin shriek. It drove the snow sideways, piling it in drifts that climbed the cabin walls. Eli stood at the single window, his back to Clara. "We are shut in," he said. The words, simple as they were, landed on Clara with the weight of a stone. Shut in, trapped, not just in the cabin, but with him. The mountains, the town, the entire world had vanished, leaving only the two of them and the screaming white. The first days were a continuation of their routine. He chopped wood from the store he kept in a small lean-to, a journey that required him to dig his way out the door. She cooked their meals of beans and biscuits. The second chair, now finished, sat opposite his. They ate in their new, balanced silence. But the cold was a living thing. It forced its way through the chinks in the logs, no matter how much mud and moss they stuffed in. The fire was a hungry beast, devouring the wood Eli brought in, but its warmth barely reached the corners of the room. The pallet on the floor, even pulled close to the hearth, became a place of misery. The floorboards were a solid sheet of ice, and the cold seeped up from the ground itself. Clara would wake in the deep night, her body rigid, her feet numb, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. After the fourth night, Eli, who had been listening to her shiver, spoke into the darkness. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of any emotion. "You will freeze to death on the floor. Clara, huddled under the new wool shawl and 2 blankets, could not deny it. I am so cold. He was silent for a long time. She heard the creak of the bed ropes as he shifted. There is room, he said, for warmth, nothing else. It was a command born of necessity. She hesitated, her mind screaming warnings. To lie beside him was a line she had not known how to cross, but the cold was absolute. It was a choice between propriety and survival. She gathered her blankets and, in the near darkness, moved to the bed. She laid her blankets on top of his. She did not get under his covers. She lay on top, rigid as a plank of wood, her back to him, on the very edge of the mattress. He did not move. He lay on his side, his back to her. Between them was a cold ridge of wool and fear. They slept like that for weeks, 2 bodies sharing a small space, separated by an inch and a world. They did not touch. If he shifted in his sleep, she would wake instantly, her heart pounding. She would lie awake, listening to him breathe. It was a slow, deep sound in the darkness, the only proof that she was not alone in the howling white. But the cabin, which had been a sparse room, became their universe. And in this universe, there were only 2 people. The barriers, so strong at first, began to wear thin, eroded by proximity. Slowly, desire awakened. It was not a sudden passion. It was a small, human thing, born of shared space and forced intimacy. It came in glances. One morning, the cabin was warmer than usual. Eli rose and went to the wash basin by the dry sink. He stripped off his long john shirt. Clara, stirring the oatmeal, turned to ask him a question and froze. She had seen his scarred hand, his scarred face, but she had not seen the map of his life written on his body. The gaslight of the saloon had shown her nothing. The light from the window, reflected white off the snow, showed her everything. His back and shoulders were laced with old scars. Some were the pale, thin lines of a knife. One, on his shoulder, was a puckered, ugly knot where a bullet had torn him. His body was hard, shaped by work and war. He was not a soft man. He turned to grab the towel, and she saw his chest, broad and marked. She looked away quickly, her face burning, but the image was seared into her mind. He was a man, real and solid, and he was sleeping inches from her. It came in small touches. Their hands brushed as she passed him a log for the fire. His fingers, calloused and strong, lingered against hers for half a second too long. Her breath caught in her throat. He pulled his hand back as if burned. She mended his clothes, the rough wool of his trousers, the soft, worn cotton of his shirt. She was holding pieces of him, the fabric that held his warmth, his scent of pine and iron. She began to notice the way his eyes would soften when he looked at the fire, the way a muscle in his jaw would jump when the wind hit the cabin particularly hard. He began to watch her. He watched her hands as she kneaded dough. He watched the way the firelight caught the red in her hair when she brushed it out at night, a long, soft curtain she used to hide her face. They were 2 people in a cage, circling each other, learning each other's scents, each other's habits, terrified to make a sound. Then the storm hit. It was not just snow, it was a blizzard, a true monster from the mountains. The wind did not howl, it bellowed. The cabin shook, and snow forced its way through the doorframe, piling in fine, white dust on the floor. The cold was murderous. That night, the fire seemed to offer no warmth at all. They lay in the bed, back to back, but the cold was a physical weight pushing down on them. Clara began to shiver. It was not a small tremble. It was a violent, uncontrollable shaking that rattled her bones. She curled into a tight ball, her teeth knocking together, but she could not get warm. Eli, beside her, was a block of still, tense warmth. He had not moved. "Clara," his voice was low, rough, startled by her shaking. I cannot stop," she chattered, her voice thin. He turned. She felt the mattress shift. He was facing her back.
He did not touch her. "I am so cold," she whispered, and a tear of pure, miserable self-pity rolled down her temple. She was going to die here, frozen, next to a man who would not even touch her. She felt a desperate, aching need, not for lust, but for a simple, human comfort, a hand holding hers, an arm to block the wind. She thought of her father's coldness, the merchant's brutal hands, the emptiness of her own arms after her baby was gone. She turned slowly, her body rigid with cold and fear. In the darkness, she could just make out his shape. His haunted eyes were on her. "Mr. Eli," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Would it be wrong to want something gentle?" She was asking for warmth. She was asking for comfort. She was asking permission to be human. He did not answer. He just looked at her, and his face, in the faint red glow from the dying embers, was a mask of pain. He had forgotten gentle. It was a word from a language he no longer spoke. He reached out, his hand hesitant. He did not touch her body. He touched her hair, his rough fingers sinking into the soft strands that were fanned out on the pillow. She did not flinch. She leaned into the touch, a movement as small as a breath. He moved closer. The fear in the space between them was so thick she could taste it. He was afraid of breaking her. She was afraid of being broken again. He lowered his head. His lips, chapped and cold, brushed against hers. It was not a kiss. It was a question. She answered by not pulling away. He kissed her then. It was hesitant, clumsy, and full of fear. It was the taste of salt and wood smoke and two cold, lonely people. It was not the kiss of a lover. It was the kiss of a fellow survivor. It ended as quickly as it began. He pulled back, but he did not go back to his side of the bed. He stayed, his hand still in her hair. She crept closer until her forehead was resting against his chest. She felt the slow, heavy beat of his heart under her ear. He laid his arm over her, pulling the blankets tight. He held her. She stopped shivering, and they fell asleep, finally, in the arms of the storm. A few days later, the blizzard had passed, leaving behind a world of blinding white and profound silence. The tension in the cabin had changed. The kiss hung between them, unspoken. Eli had gone to check his traps, his first time out in a week. Clara, desperate for order, began to clean the cabin, to air it out. She shook the blankets, swept the floor. She went to the large cedar chest in the corner, the one he had taken the blue shawl from. It was where he kept his few possessions, his late wife's things. She had never touched it. But the lid was slightly ajar. He must not have closed it properly. She went to shut it, but her eyes caught on something inside. Tucked in a fold of clean linen was a small, silver-framed photograph. She knew she should not. She lifted it. It was a tintype of a woman. She was young, perhaps 19. She was smiling, a wide, easy smile that Clara did not know how to imitate. Her hair was pale, and her dress was fine, with lace at the collar. She looked soft, untouched, loved. This was the last one Langley had mentioned. This was his wife, the woman who had owned the blue shawl, who had slept in this bed, who had made this cabin a home. Clara felt a cold sickness. She was not this woman. She was the stray, the replacement, the damaged goods. She was the woman he had settled for because he needed a wife and she needed a home. She heard the crunch of snow outside. He was coming back. Her hands fumbled. She placed the photograph exactly as she had found it and closed the chest, the lid fitting with a soft, final thud. When Eli entered, his face grim from the cold, she was standing by the fire. He looked at her, then at the chest. He knew. Clara turned away, her throat tight. She did not ask. She had no right to his past, no right to his grief. She was just the woman who was here now. He did not speak of it, either, but the silence in the room was heavy again.
filled with the ghost of the smiling girl. He had come back empty-handed, except for one thing. He carried something small and breathing against his chest, wrapped in his scarf. "A trap," he grunted. "Broke its leg." He unwrapped the scarf. It was a fox cub, its fur a matted red. Its eyes were wide with terror, and its back leg was bent at a terrible angle, the bone showing white. "It is suffering," Eli said. He pulled his knife. "It is a quick thing, a kindness." "No!" Clara's voice was sharp, shocking them both. He stopped, his hand on the hilt. "Please," she said, her voice softening, pleading. "Let me try, please, Eli. It is just small." He looked at the dying animal, then at her. He saw the desperate, fierce light in her eyes. He had seen that look before, in men on a battlefield who refused to die. "It will die anyway. Clara, it is the law of this place." "Let me try," she insisted. She stepped forward, holding out her hands. "I know how to fix broken things." He stared at her for a long moment. He saw her, the woman who had been beaten and sold and lost a child, and who still stood there, demanding the right to hope. He gave a short, sharp sigh and sheathed his knife. "It will die," he repeated, but he placed the tiny, trembling animal in her hands. They worked together. He found a small crate and filled it with old rags. She cleaned the wound, her hands surprisingly steady. Eli held the cub, his large, scarred fingers gentle against its throat, keeping it still. He whittled splints from a piece of pine, his hands moving with practiced precision. She bound the leg. They gave it water with a little sugar, and then, miraculously, it drank. They put the box near the fire. For 3 days, they cared for it. Clara fed it broth from a spoon, a few drops at a time. Eli would come in from the cold, and his first glance would be to the box. Clara saw a man she did not know. When the cub whimpered, she saw Eli's face tighten, not in annoyance, but in a strange, unsure empathy. He was awkward. He did not know how to be tender. One evening, he knelt by the box. The cub was sleeping. He reached out one finger and stroked its head, just once. The gesture was so hesitant, so full of a vulnerability she had never seen, that it broke her heart. He was not just the hard, scarred survivor. He was a man who had locked his softness away, and this small, broken animal was picking the lock. That night, the cabin was quiet. The wind had died. The fox was sleeping. Clara was mending a seam in her dress. Eli was watching her, the way he looked at her. It had changed. The ghost of his wife was still there. But now, Clara was there too. He stood up from his chair and came to her. He knelt in front of her pallet. He did not speak. He just took the sewing from her hands and set it aside. He took her hands in his. They were red and chapped from the lye soap and the cold. He raised them to his lips and kissed her knuckles. It was more intimate than the kiss in the dark. It was a gesture of reverence. "Clara," he whispered. It was the first time he had used her name as anything but a label. She knew, and she was not afraid, not of him. He lifted her from the pallet and carried her to the bed. He unwrapped the blue shawl from her shoulders. He undid the buttons of her worn dress. It was slow. It was aching. It was 2 people, covered in scars, finding a patch of unharmed skin. When they came together, it was not a fire. It was a thaw. It was the slow, painful, vulnerable melting of 2 winters. It was a quiet, desperate clinging, a confirmation that they were both still alive. Afterward, in the deep silence, he lay with his back to her. She thought he had fallen asleep. Then she heard it, a sound, a small, choked gasp, torn from his chest. He was crying. It was not loud, but it was violent. His shoulders shook with silent, agonizing sobs. It was the crying of a man who had not cried in a decade. The war, the wife, the loneliness, the sheer crushing weight of his life. Clara's heart broke.
She did not ask him what was wrong. She did not offer soft platitudes. She knew what was wrong. She simply moved against him, wrapping her arms around his chest from behind. She held him, her cheek pressed against his scarred back. She held him as he had held her against the cold. She said nothing. She just held on, a small anchor in his dark, violent sea. The next morning, the air was clear. He was quiet, but his eyes were different. The haunted look was still there, but it was softer, as if the ghosts had taken a step back. He reached into the cedar chest. He pulled out a small, tarnished silver ring. It was simple, worn smooth with time. He held it out to her on his calloused palm. It was not a proposal. It was a statement. "It was my mother's," he said, his voice rough. He would not meet her eyes. "It is too large, and it ain't much." He took a breath.
I ain't got much, but what I got, it's yours.
Clara looked at the ring, then at his face. She held out her hand. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was, as he said, too large. It slid down to her knuckle. She made a fist to keep it on. "It is enough," she said. The thaw in the cabin was real, but the law of the land, as Eli had said, was unchanging. 3 days later, Clara woke and went to the box. The fox cub was still. It had not made a sound. She touched it. It was cold. It had died in its sleep, its leg neatly splinted, its belly full. She had done everything right, and it had died anyway. She lifted the small, stiff body. She wrapped it in the rag it had slept on. She could not cry. She just felt empty. When Eli came in, he saw her holding the bundle. He said nothing. He took the shovel, went outside, and began to dig into the frozen ground near the woodpile. It took him half an hour. The rhythmic thunk of the shovel against the ice, the only sound. He came back. "It is done." Clara walked outside. The air was so cold it burned her lungs. She knelt by the small, shallow hole. She placed the bundle inside. She stood there, staring at the dark patch of earth in the endless white. And then the tears came. She cried for the fox. She cried for the baby she had buried under a dogwood tree in St. Louis. She cried for the waste of it, the uselessness of trying. Her hands, ungloved, were bright red against the snow. The tears froze on her cheeks. Eli stood beside her. He did not touch her. He did not pull her away. He just stood guard, a dark, silent shape against the snow, watching her grieve until she was finished. The snow melted as if a great hand had brushed it from the mountains. The world, which had been a silent study in white and gray, returned in a rush of sound. The creek behind the cabin became a roar. Water dripped from the eaves, ran in rivulets down the packed earth, and turned the clearing into a sea of deep, rich mud. The air smelled of wet pine and thawing soil. The thaw brought a restlessness to Clara. She had survived. Now, she needed to live. She found a small, rusted spadehead in the lean-to. Eli fastened it to a new handle he carved from a piece of ash. She took the sack of seeds he had, corn, beans, and squash, and found a patch of land on the south side of the cabin, where the sun hit strongest. The ground was cold and hard, packed tight by the winter. She had to fight it, putting all her weight on the spade, her hands blistering, but every clod of earth she turned over was an act of faith. It was a claim. She was not just a guest in this cabin. She was planting a garden. She was planting roots. While she dug and planted, Eli worked on the porch. A section of the floor had rotted through, a trap of splintered wood. He tore out the old planks with a pry bar, the sound of protesting wood and shrieking nails echoing in the clearing. He replaced them with new, clean boards cut from a pine he had felled. The steady, rhythmic sound of his hammer was a comfort. It was the sound of a man building, not just surviving. Their bond grew in this shared work. It was not a bond of words. He still spoke little,
but he would leave a bucket of fresh water for her by the garden plot before he left to check his traps. She would have hot coffee waiting for him when he returned, his boots caked in mud. They sat on the repaired porch at dusk. The single chair and the crate were brought out into the cool evening air. They watched the sky turn from blue to a deep, bruised purple. The valley below them, which had been a white void, was now turning a faint, hopeful green. He would whittle. She would mend a shirt. The ring on her finger was still too large. She had wrapped a small piece of dark thread around the back of the band to keep it from falling off. It was a small, secret adjustment, making something that was not hers fit. Their nights in the shared bed were quiet. The fear was gone, replaced by a tentative, unspoken comfort. They slept, no longer back to back, but facing the same direction, like two spoons nested in a drawer. One Sunday, Clara woke to the sound of a distant bell. It was the church in Promise. The sound carried up the mountain on the clear spring air. She washed her one good dress, the gray one, and ironed it with a sad iron she heated on the stove. She put her hair up neatly. "I am going to church," she announced. Eli, sharpening his axe, did not look up. "We ain't church folk, they ain't our folk." "I want to go," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I want to walk in, not as a stray, but as your wife." She looked at her hand, at the ring. The word tasted strange, but she said it. He stopped his work. He looked at the set of her jaw. He sighed, a long breath of air, and put the axe down. He went to the basin, poured fresh water, and scraped a razor over his face. He put on a clean shirt, the one she had mended. The scars on his neck were stark white against the dark blue cotton. He looked taller, somehow, and more dangerous than he did in his buckskins. They rode the horse down the muddy trail, Clara sitting behind him, her hands resting lightly on his waist. She could feel the solid strength of his back. The town of Promise looked smaller, less threatening in the bright sun, but when they dismounted and walked toward the small, plank-board church, the feeling returned. They were late. The singing had already started. When Eli pushed the door open, the voices faltered. The music from the small reed organ went sour for a note. Every head turned. Clara saw them all. Mr. Abernathy from the store, the ranch hands, looking uncomfortable in clean clothes, and the women, the ones who had whispered. Their faces were uniform masks of cold judgment. Eli's hand was on her back, low, guiding her. He did not seem to notice the stairs, or perhaps he was so used to them. They meant nothing. He was a stone wall, and she was in his shadow. They sat in the last pew. The preacher, a young man with earnest eyes, nodded at them, a flicker of surprise, then welcome. The sermon was about forgiveness. Clara felt her face burn. The whispers started behind them, a dry, skittering sound like insects. "That is him, Thorn, and her, bold as brass." Eli sat like a statue, his eyes on the preacher, but Clara knew he heard every word. After the service, they walked out into the sunlight. The congregation milled on the steps, and a path cleared for them. The stairs were like physical blows. Clara kept her eyes on the ground. A small boy, not more than 7, the son of one of the whispering women, picked up a pebble from the street. He had heard his mother talking. He had heard the men in the saloon. He pointed. "That is Eli's mountain whore," he shouted, his voice high and shrill. He threw the stone. It hit Clara on the forearm. It was a small, sharp sting, but it felt like a gunshot. She flinched, a small gasp escaping her. Her face went pale. Eli moved. He did not lunge for the boy. He did not say a word. He simply turned his head and looked at the mother, who was standing frozen, her hand half covering a small, proud smile. Eli's gaze was cold. It was the gaze of a man who had seen death, who understood it. It was slow, deliberate, and empty of all mercy. The woman's smile vanished. She turned white. She grabbed her son's arm, her fingers digging in, and dragged him away, stumbling. The preacher, Reverend Allen, hurried over, his face flushed with distress. "Mr. Thorne, ma'am, please, I must apologize for my congregation. That was unchristian." He was nervous, wringing his hands, but he stood his ground. "It is good to see new faces in the house of the Lord. I trust you are settling in for the spring." He looked from Eli's hard face to Clara's pale one. "Forgive me. It is a formality, but are you two joined in the eyes of God?" The world stopped. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the lie or the truth. The truth would confirm every whisper. Stray, whore, not his problem. Eli stood beside her, silent as the mountains, his hand resting near the knife on his belt. His silence was a void, waiting for her to fill it. Clara lifted her chin. She looked the preacher in the eye. "Yes," she said. Her voice was clear and cold. "We are married." She felt more than saw. Eli turned his head. He looked at her. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his dark eyes. Surprise, respect, perhaps even anger. He stayed silent. He did not confirm her lie. He did not deny it. His silence was its own wall. The preacher let out a breath of relief.
Wonderful. That is wonderful. Please, do come again. All are welcome here. All.
They walked away. The ride home was long and silent. Clara felt sick with the lie, but also triumphant. She had claimed her place. A few days later, she went to town for supplies. She was out of flour and coffee. She wore the ring and the lie like armor. She felt stronger. She was in the general store, Mr. Abernathy measuring out beans for her, when the bell on the door tinkled. A man entered, shaking dust from a fine city suit and a bowler hat. He was soft-looking, with a fleshy face and small, quick eyes. He was talking to the man who entered with him. "The land speculation out here is promising." He turned, saw Clara, and stopped. His eyes widened. A slow, wet smile spread across his face. A smile that was not a smile. Clara Jenkins, as I live and breathe." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The sack of beans slipped from her numb fingers, spilling onto the floor. "Mr. Dyer," she whispered. It was Thomas Dyer, the brother-in-law of the merchant who had beaten her. A man who had looked at her, in that fine St. Louis house, with the same hunger as his kin, but with a sharper, more patient cunning. "I am here on business, my dear," he said, his voice slick. His eyes roamed over her, taking in the mended dress, the rough hands, the silver ring. "But what a pleasant surprise. We all thought you had simply vanished. My brother-in-law was most distressed, though I see you have landed on your feet." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a confidential purr, or perhaps on your back. "You will not speak to me that way," Clara said, her voice shaking, but she stood her ground. "I will speak to you how I please," he hissed, his smile gone. "You are a runaway, a woman of no character, who fled her obligations. You left St. Louis under a cloud of shame." He stepped closer, close enough for her to smell the bay rum on him, the same scent the merchant had worn. "I am staying at the hotel," he whispered. "You will come to my room tonight. We will discuss what you owe my family, what you owe me, or I will be forced to tell this charming, God-fearing little town all about your sins, about the baby." Clara ran. She did not stop to pick up the beans. She did not look at Mr. Abernathy, who was watching with avid, greedy interest. She burst out of the store and ran to the horse. She fumbled with the reins, her hands useless. She looked back and saw Dyer standing on the boardwalk, watching her, a satisfied smirk on his face. She rode like a madwoman, urging the horse up the trail, its hooves slipping in the mud. She burst into the cabin, a whirlwind of panic. Eli was at the table, oiling his rifle. He looked up, his eyes narrowing at her terror. "He is here," she gasped, sobbing, sliding down the door to the floor. "A man from St. Louis, Thomas Dyer. He knows me. He knows. He knows everything." Eli's hand stopped moving. The oiled rag was still. "What man?" She told him. His name, the threat, the hotel room. Eli's face changed. It did not become angry. It became still. It was the stillness of the deep winter, the stillness of the old bloodstains on the floor. It was the face from his nightmares. He stood up. He did not put on his coat. He picked up his pistol holster, the one he rarely wore, and strapped it to his hip. "Stay here," he said. His voice was flat. "Bar the door." "Eli, no!" she cried, scrambling to her feet. "He will. He has the law on his side. He is a rich man." "He ain't the law," Eli said. He walked out the door. He rode into town. He did not ride fast. He did not look left or right. He saw Dyer on the porch of the saloon, smoking a cigar, laughing with the sheriff, the same sheriff who had dismissed Clara as not his problem. Eli dismounted. He walked straight up the steps. Dyer looked up, his smile fading when he saw the man approaching. He did not recognize him. "I do not believe we have been in—" Eli's hand shot out. He grabbed the front of Dyer's fine wool suit, yanking him from his chair and slamming him against the wall. The cigar flew from his mouth. "You!" Eli growled, his voice a low vibration of violence. "You will get on your horse. You will ride east. You will not stop until you are out of this territory. And if you ever look at her again, I will cut your eyes out." "Assault!" Dyer choked, his eyes wide with terror, clawing at Eli's wrist. "Sheriff! Sheriff! Arrest this man! He is mad!" The sheriff, who had been watching with a lazy expression, slowly stood up. He rested his hand on the butt of his own gun. "Thorne, that is enough. Let the man go. This is a civil matter." "He threatened my wife," Eli said, his voice flat, his grip not loosening. Dyer, finding his courage now that the law was involved, sneered. "Wife, is that what she calls herself? Ask him. Sheriff, ask him if she is the whore who ran from St. Louis, the one who had a bastard child and abandoned it." The word hit Eli like a physical blow. He shoved Dyer. Dyer stumbled back, crashing into a table. "Now, Eli, that is enough," the sheriff barked, his voice suddenly hard. He stepped between them, his hand on his gun. "This gentleman, Mr. Dyer, has a claim. He says this woman is, let us say, damaged goods, that she ran from a contract, fled her obligations." "She has no contract," Eli said. "That ain't for you to decide," the sheriff said, his eyes flat and cold. He was siding with the man from the city, the man with the fine suit and the full wallet. "The law is for decent folk, Mr. Thorne. The law don't protect women like her, not strays, not the ones who come here with no name. Now you go on home. Mr. Dyer is a guest in this town." Eli stared at the sheriff. He saw the law for what it was, a shield for men like Dyer, and a weapon against women like Clara. He saw the cowardice in the sheriff's eyes. He looked at Dyer, who was straightening his vest, a triumphant, hateful smirk on his soft face. Eli could kill them both. He could feel the war rising in him, the red, hot desire to end them. But he could not here, not in Keeper. He turned, his body rigid with a violence he was holding back by a single, fraying thread. He walked down the steps, got on his horse, and rode away. Clara was pacing the cabin, twisting her hands. She saw him ride into the clearing. He did not look defeated. He looked empty. He looked like the man who cried in the dark. He dismounted, his movements stiff. "He is still there," he said, walking past her into the cabin. "The law is on his side. Clara's face crumpled.
What did he say?
It does not matter what he said. But it did. Dyer, emboldened by his victory, was not finished. He stood on the saloon porch, buying drinks for the men. He told his story. And the story twisted and grew with every telling, fed by the whispers that had been there all along.
A bastard baby,
Dyer proclaimed, his voice loud enough for all to hear.
had it in secret, wicked thing, left it in a ditch to die.
The news spread like fire in dry grass. Clara did not know. The next day, she forced herself to go to town. They were out of coffee, and she would not let that man make her a prisoner. She would show him she was not afraid. The town was silent when she rode in. It was worse than the whispers. It was a cold, hard, accusing silence. Every eye that met hers was filled with disgust. She walked into the general store. Mr. Abernathy stood behind the counter, his arms crossed. "We do not serve your kind here," he said, his voice flat. "Get out." Clara froze.
What?
"You heard me. Get out." The women from the church were standing on the boardwalk outside, staring in. One of them, the mother of the boy who had thrown the stone, stepped forward. "Murderer," she whispered, her face alight with righteous hate. "Baby killer." It was too much, the shame she had carried for so long, the private grief she had buried under a dogwood tree. It all broke. The looks on their faces, they saw her as a monster. She turned and ran. She did not go for the horse. She just ran, her breath sobbing in her chest. She ran past the last building, past the edge of the town, into the scrub. A cold spring rain began to fall, but she did not notice. She ran toward the hills, toward the woods, anywhere, away from their faces. She stumbled, fell to her knees in the mud, got up, and kept running, her lungs burning, until she could not run anymore. Eli came home to an empty cabin. The door was swinging open. He saw the horse still tied. He knew. He tracked her. Her boot prints were plain in the fresh mud. He followed the trail into the woods, the rain plastering his hair to his head, his face a mask of stone. He found her. She was huddled at the base of a large pine, her face buried in her hands. Her dress was torn, and she was covered in mud from her fall. She was a broken, weeping thing. "Clara!" She looked up, her face wrecked with a grief and shame so deep it was terrifying. "It is true!" she cried, her voice raw. "It is all true!" "I do not care," he said, his voice flat. "You do not understand," she sobbed, hitting the wet ground with her fist. "He said I left it to die. He said I murdered it, but I did not. I did not." He stood there, the rain dripping from the brim of his hat, and he let her speak. He let her pour out the poison. It was after he sent me back to my father," she gasped, the words tumbling out. "I was alone, in a rented room. No one would help me. It came early. It was so small, so small." She was rocking back and forth, holding her stomach, reliving it. I held her. She was so cold. I held her all night, trying to keep her warm. But she just stopped. She stopped breathing. She died in my arms, my baby. She was mine, and she died. The rain came down harder, a gray, merciless sheet. I could not let them take her. They would have put her in a pauper's grave. I wrapped her in my only good shawl. I took her. I walked all night, outside the city. I found a dogwood tree. It was flowering. I dug the hole with my own hands. I buried her. I buried her under the dogwood tree. She was finished. She had no more words. She just wept, her shoulders heaving, her shame and grief finally laid bare in the mud. Eli did not speak. He did not offer soft words. He did not say he understood. He stepped forward. He leaned down. He slid one arm under her back and one under her knees. He lifted her. She was heavy with mud and wet clothes, a mess of tears and rain. He lifted her as if she was weightless. He lifted her as he had lifted her from the stagecoach, from the ruin of her old life. He carried her home. He did not stumble. His steps were sure and steady on the wet trail. He carried her through the woods, across the clearing, and into the cabin. He set her down gently by the fire. "Take off the wet things," he ordered, his voice rough. He turned his back, adding log after log to the fire until it roared, a wild, defiant blaze. She changed, her hands shaking, into her thin nightgown. She sat on her pallet, pulling the blue shawl around her, shivering. That night, Eli did something he had never done. He walked to the table and lit the oil lamp. Then he lit the second lamp, the one on the shelf. He found the stubs of candles, the ones she saved, and he lit them all. The small cabin was suddenly, shockingly bright, blazing with a warm, steady light. It was a fortress against the dark, rainy night and the judgment of the world. He turned to her. She was watching him, her eyes wide and red in the golden light. He came to her. He did not kneel. He stood over her, a dark, solid protector. He swore. His voice was not loud, but it was the most powerful sound she had ever heard. It was an oath, sealed in firelight. "You are mine," he said, his eyes burning with a cold, clear fire. "You are not his. You are not this town's. You are mine. No law, no man, no lie changes that." He held out his hand. She looked at it, then placed her small, red raw hand in his. He pulled her to her feet. He did not pull her to the bed. He led her to the table. He sat her down in his chair, the one he had made. He took the crate and sat opposite her, in the full, bright light. He picked up his knife and a piece of wood, and in the blazing light, surrounded by the storm, he began to carve. He was guarding her. He was staying awake. And for the first time since she had left St. Enid and Lewis, Clara felt truly, completely safe. The blaze of light from the lamps and candles had burned down, leaving the cabin in the gray, pre-dawn chill. Eli had not slept. He had sat at the table, his knife in his hand, a newly carved, sharp-edged piece of wood beside him. He was a sentry, guarding her from the world. Clara had drifted into a fitful sleep on her pallet, the blue shawl clutched around her, her dreams filled with angry, whispering faces and the smell of bay rum. She awoke to the hard, sharp sound of horses, not one horse, but several. Eli was on his feet in an instant, the knife gone, the rifle in his hands. He moved to the window, his body low. "It is the sheriff," he said, his voice flat, "and two others. Dyer is with them." Clara's heart seized. "To arrest me." "They will not take you," Eli said. He checked the load in his rifle. He was not asking. He was stating a fact. He walked to the door and barred it. A heavy fist pounded on the wood. "Eli Thorne, open this door in the name of the law." Eli stood in the center of the room. "What do you want, Sheriff?" "I have a lawful complaint from Mr. Thomas Dyer." The sheriff shouted, his voice tight with an anger he had not shown before. "He claims the woman you are harboring, Clara Jenkins, is a fugitive from a legal contract. He says she is a vagrant and a woman of low morals, accused of abandoning a child. I have a warrant for her arrest." "You ain't got a warrant for anything." Eli's voice was calm, but it cut through the door. "You got a rich man's complaint. It ain't the same." "Do not make this difficult. Thorne, I am sworn to uphold the law. Send her out." "She is not going," Eli said. There was a silence. Clara could hear the men muttering. She heard Dyer's high, impatient voice. "Break it down! She is in there! The murdering—" "You break this door," Eli called out, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "And the man who comes through it will not walk out. That is a promise." Clara stood by the hearth, her hands pressed to her mouth, her body trembling so hard she could barely stand. "Thorne,
You are threatening an officer!"
the sheriff yelled, his voice now a mix of fear and bluster.
"That is a hanging offense!"
"And you are trespassing," Eli replied. "This is my land. This is my home. The woman is my wife. You have no warrant, and you have no right. Get off my land." The word wife hung in the air. He had claimed her. He had claimed her in front of the law, in front of her accuser. There was a long, tense pause. Clara heard the jingle of a harness.
"This ain't over, Thorn!"
The sheriff's voice was full of gravel. He was backing down, but he was furious. He had been humiliated. "You cannot hide from the law. You have made powerful enemies today. We will be back, and we will have the warrant." Clara peeked through a crack in the window shutters. She saw the sheriff, his face red, mount his horse. Dyer was arguing with him, his face purple with rage, but the sheriff cut him off. The deputies looked spooked. They knew Eli's reputation. They knew he was not a man who bluffed. They rode away, leaving a heavy, poisoned silence in the clearing. Eli lowered his rifle. He did not unbar the door. He turned to Clara. His face was grim. "He will be back."
"What? What will we do?"
she whispered. "You will stay here," he said. "I will go into town. I will see the preacher. I will see if there is any man with sense left."
"No!"
she cried, running to him.
"They will arrest you! Dyer will have you killed!"
"They will not," he said. "Not in the open." He looked at her, his eyes dark. "He called you he called you a murderer. He will not say it again." He left. Clara spent the day a prisoner, the door barred, every sound from the woods making her jump. She prayed. She prayed to a God she was not sure listened, prayed for the man who had called her his wife. He returned at dusk, his face carved from granite. "The preacher will speak for us," he said, his voice tired. "But Dyer has been buying whiskey for every man in the saloon. He has told them his story. The sheriff is on his side. Langley, the trapper. He is stirring them up. He tells them it is not right. A man like me living with a woman like you. He says we are a stain on the town." "They hate us," she whispered. "They fear what they do not understand," he said, "and they hate what they fear." The next few days were a waking nightmare. They lived behind the barred door. Eli did not leave. He sat, cleaning his rifle, his pistol, watching the windows. The air in the cabin was so thick with tension. Clara felt she would suffocate. The attack came 4 nights later. The moon was a thin, cold sliver. Clara was trying to sleep when Eli's hand clamped down on her shoulder. "Get up, now! No noise!" She sat up, her heart stopping. "Listen," he whispered. She heard it. Not horses, not yet, but voices. Men trying to be quiet, moving through the woods, and the clink of glass. They were drunk. "A mob," he said, his voice flat. He was already moving, grabbing his rifle. "Eli." "The floor," he said, pointing to the spot where his bed had been. He moved the heavy frame, revealing a dark, square hole in the floorboards, covered by a trap door. "Get in." "What?" "The crawl space. Get in. Now. Clara, do not argue." He lifted the heavy door. A smell of cold, damp earth rose from the blackness. "No," she said, backing away. "I will not leave you. I will fight. I can load the other rifle." "You will not," he said, and his voice was a whip. He grabbed her arm. "They come for you, if they get in. If they find you, I cannot stop them all." His meaning was horribly clear. They would not just kill her. Terror, colder than the crawlspace, seized her. She nodded, her teeth chattering. "Take this." He pushed a blanket at her. "There are cracks in the floorboards by the east wall. You can see. You will stay there. You will not move. You will not make a sound. No matter what you hear, do you understand me?" "Yes." He helped her down into the darkness. It was shallow,
not even 3 feet deep. She had to crouch, the dirt cold and wet beneath her knees. She crawled to the east wall, the blanket clutched to her chest. "Eli," she whispered, looking up at his dark shape. He was looking down, his face a mask of agony. He wanted to close the door, to seal her in, to protect her. "Bar it," she whispered. From this side, if you can." "There is no bar," he said. "Just the door. Put it down." She did. The heavy wood thudded into place, plunging her into absolute, terrifying darkness. She was buried alive. She crawled to the wall, feeling her way, until her fingers touched the rough log foundation. She pressed her face to the floorboards. Above her, she heard Eli slide the bed frame back, covering the trap door. Then, silence. And then, the shouting. "Thorne! Eli Thorne! We know you are in there!" It was Langley's voice, slurring with whiskey and hate. "We come for the whore! Thorne! We are decent folk! We come to take back what is decent!" "Get off my land, Langley!" Eli's voice boomed from inside. "Not this time!" another voice roared. "We got 20 men! You cannot stop us! Send her out, or we burn you out!" "Try," was Eli's only answer. A rock shattered the window. Then another. Clara stifled a scream. "Get him!" Langley roared. A gunshot exploded, deafening in the night. It came from the cabin. A man screamed, a high, thin sound of pain. "He shot me! The crazy bastard shot me!" "Fire!" Langley bellowed. "Fire at the windows!" A volley of gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the thin log walls. Clara heard them thwack into the logs, into the furniture. She flattened herself against the dirt, her hands over her head, convinced one would tear through the floor and find her. She heard Eli moving. He fired. Once. A heavy, measured shot from his buffalo rifle. Another scream. "He is killing us!" a voice cried in panic. "He is just one man!" Langley roared. "Rush the door! Break it down!" Clara heard heavy bodies throw themselves against the door. The wood groaned and cracked. Eli fired again, this time with the pistol. Fast, twice. The door burst open with a sound of splintering wood. Clara scrambled to the crack in the floor. She could see. It was a nightmare of shadows and firelight. 3 men stumbled in. Eli was there, a dark shadow. He used the rifle like a club, a brutal, sweeping arc that took the first man in the chest. He went down. The second man had a knife. He lunged. Eli turned. The rifle too slow. The man's arm rose and fell. Eli grunted, a deep, sharp sound of pain. Clara clapped her hand over her mouth to stop her own scream. Eli dropped the rifle. He hit the man with his left fist, a hard, solid sound of bone on bone. The man staggered back. The third man, Langley, was raising a pistol. Eli did not hesitate. He lunged forward, ignoring the knife man, and drove his own knife into Langley's shoulder. Langley howled and dropped the gun. The other man, the one with the knife, was coming at Eli from behind. "Eli!" Clara screamed, her voice muffled by the floor. He spun. Too late. The man's arm came up. "Stop! In the name of God! Stop this!" The voice was a thunderclap. It was not Eli. It was not the mob. The men in the cabin froze. Through the broken door, in the moonlight, stood Reverend Allen. He was not holding a Bible. He was holding a double-barreled shotgun, and it was leveled at the mob. "Shame!" the preacher roared, his voice breaking with fury. "Shame on you all! You call yourselves decent? You call yourselves Christians? You are a mob of drunken cowards, attacking a man in his home." Langley, clutching his bleeding shoulder, spat. "He has a murdering whore in there. Preacher, it ain't right." "And is it your job to cast the stone?" the preacher thundered, stepping into the cabin. He looked at the chaos, at the wounded men, at Eli, who was standing, swaying slightly, his hand pressed to his side.
This is not the law. This is sin. Get out. Get these men and get back to town before God strikes you all down."
The mob, faced with the shotgun and the fury of a man they respected, faltered. The whiskey courage was gone. They saw their wounded. They saw the coldness in Eli's eyes.
"Go," the preacher commanded.
They went. They dragged their wounded with them, Langley cursing, others silent with shame or fear. They vanished into the woods, leaving only the sound of their ragged retreat. The preacher looked at Eli. "Are you—"
"Go with them,"
Eli rasped.
"Make sure they go."
"I will send the doctor."
"No, just go."
The preacher looked at Eli, then at the floor, his eyes seeming to pierce the wood. He knew. He nodded, his face grim. "God forgive us," he murmured. And he, too, was gone. Silence. The cabin was wrecked. The door was off its hinges. The window was gone. Furniture was overturned, and there was blood on the floor. Clara pushed at the trapdoor. It was stuck. The bed frame shifted. "Eli!" she cried. She heard a heavy thud as he fell against the bed. Then the scrape of him pushing it. Just enough. She forced the door open and scrambled out. The room was destroyed. It looked worse than the bloodstains she had tried to scrub. But she only saw him. He was slumped against the wall, his face pale as ash in the moonlight. His left side, from his ribs down, was soaked in black, glistening blood. The knife man. "You are bleeding," she whispered, her voice stupid. "He got me," Eli breathed, his eyes closing. "No," she said. "No, you do not." She ripped a clean strip from a tablecloth that had been tossed to the floor. "Press this. Hard." He took it, his hand weak. She flew. She lit every lamp. She threw wood on the fire, desperate for light and heat. She grabbed the whiskey, the needle from her sewing kit, and the last of her clean thread. She tore his shirt open. It was a deep, ugly gash, just under his ribs. It was bleeding. A lot. "You have to stitch it," he mumbled, his head lolling. I have never—" she stammered, her hands shaking so violently she could not thread the needle. "You can," he said. He was fading. "You fix broken things." She looked at him, at his face, slack with pain. She looked at her trembling hands. She took a deep breath. She poured whiskey on the wound. He did not flinch. He was barely conscious. She poured whiskey on the needle and thread. She put the thread to the needle. Her hands shook. She could not— "Hold still," she commanded herself. She took another breath. She threaded it. She took the first stitch. The needle plunged into his skin. His whole body spasmed. A low, animal sound came from his throat, but he did not move again. He was out. Clara began to sew. She stitched his skin back together, her own tears blurring her vision, her hands covered in his blood. It was a clumsy, ugly seam, but it was tight. It held. She finished, tied the knot, and slumped back, her body shaking with reaction. He was alive. He was breathing. She washed him, gently. She covered him with every blanket they had. She sat by the bed, watching his chest rise and fall, for hours. As dawn approached, she knew he was feverish. She needed more bandages, clean ones. She went to the cedar chest, the one he kept locked. It was broken, the lid splintered by a stray bullet. She opened it, looking for linens. She saw the folded dress, the one that belonged to the smiling woman, and under it, a book, a worn, leather-bound journal. She should not have— it was his darkness, his past. But she had stitched his flesh. She had a right to know the man she had just saved. She opened it. The handwriting was rough, slanted, the words of a man who was not comfortable with a pen. The first entries were from the war. They were not stories. They were images, like shards of glass. April 12th, 1863. Saw Miller's head taken by grape shot. Could not find his hands.
We held the ridge. I do not know why. April 14th. They ran at us. Boys, not older than 16. We cut them down. The screaming was bad. I cannot sleep.
May 2nd. Took a ball in the shoulder. It is hot, I think.
The journal stopped for 2 years.
June 1865. Home, it is not home. They look at me like I am a ghost. My hands shake. I cannot be around people. Then, a new section. March 1866. Met Sarah. She is light. She does not see the dark in me. She laughs. I do not know what to do with that. May 1866. We are married. We will build a cabin, up the mountain, away from everyone. She says she does not mind. She says she just needs me. Clara's hand trembled. She read on. The entries were of building the cabin, of a hard but simple life. December 1867. The cough is worse. Her lungs are wet. The doctor left. He knows he gave me laudanum. For the pain, he did not say which one of us should take it. December 14th. She is so thin. She asked me to hold her. She is burning. I am so cold. December the 15th. Buried Sarah today. The ground was hard. She is cold. I am alone. The next pages were years of emptiness. Snow. Set traps. No one came. The silence is too loud. I do not know how to keep living. I do not know why I should. Clara was weeping. Silent tears running down her face. She felt his grief, a cold, hard stone in her own stomach. She turned the page. There were many blank ones. And then a new entry. It was dated just weeks ago, after the day she had come back from town, shamed by the whispers. The day he had given her the blue shawl. She brings the light back. She is small, but she is not weak. She is broken, but she is not bitter. She is planting a garden in frozen mud. I see the darkness in her, too. It matches mine. And she still stands. She makes me want to stand. She brings the light back. I do not know how to deserve it. Clara's breath hitched. She let out a small, quiet sob. It was not a sob of sadness. It was a sob of recognition. He saw her. He saw all of her, the shame, the loss, the broken parts, and he did not see a stray or a whore. He saw light. She closed the journal. She placed it gently back in the chest. She went to him. He was sleeping, his face pale, his breath shallow but steady. She kissed his forehead, her lips tasting the salt of his skin. She lay down on the bed beside him, careful not to touch his wound, and wrapped her arms around his good side. She held him, her small body shielding him, and for the first time, she was the strong one. She held him all night, her warmth, her life pouring into him. The next morning, the sun streamed through the broken window, illuminating the ruined cabin. Eli was still sleeping. The fever had not spiked. Clara got up. She moved with a new purpose. She went to the fireplace. She found a loose stone in the hearth, one she had noticed her first day. She pried it out with Eli's knife. Behind it, wrapped in a scrap of oilcloth, was a small, plain gold band. It had been her mother's. It was her last keepsake, the only thing of value she had not sold for a stagecoach ticket, her last tie to her old life. She unwrapped it. She looked at the ring. Then she looked at her left hand, at the tarnished, too large silver ring he had given her, the one that had belonged to Sarah. Slowly, she slid his mother's ring from her finger. She went to the table. In the center of the ruined room, she placed the tarnished silver ring on the wood. Then, right beside it, she placed her own mother's plain gold band. 2 rings, 2 pasts, 2 broken lives. Offered. Eli's fever broke on the 3rd day, for 2 days and nights. Clara had not slept, bathing his face with cold creek water, forcing sips of willow bark tea between his clenched teeth. She had watched, terrified, as his nightmares returned. This time not of the war. but of the fight in the cabin. He thrashed, calling out, his hands clenching, reopening the wound she had so clumsily stitched. She held him down, her small weight against his, whispering, "You are safe. I am here. You are safe." When he woke, his eyes were clear. He looked at her, his gaze sharp and aware. He saw the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the dried blood still under her fingernails. He looked at his side, at the row of tight, black stitches. "You did this," he rasped.
"I had to,"
she whispered. He did not thank her. He simply nodded, a look of profound, weary acceptance passing over his face. He had trusted her with his life, and she had not failed. Weeks passed. The cabin, at first a ruin of splintered wood and broken glass, slowly mended. Eli was weak, his movements stiff and pained, but he would not be still. He sat on the porch, in the new spring sun, and showed Clara how to stretch a new piece of oiled parchment over the broken window frame. She, in turn, fed him the broth she made, and cleaned his wound with a fierce, protective tenderness. The door was the biggest problem. It was hacked to pieces. Eli showed her how to use his tools, how to measure and saw the boards he had set aside. They rebuilt it together. When they hung it, the hinges a little crooked. It felt stronger than the original. It was their door. The townsfolk left them utterly alone. It was a shunning, cold and complete. When Clara rode the horse to the general store, Eli was not yet strong enough. The few people on the street would cross to the other side. Mr. Abernathy sold her what she needed, but he did not meet her eyes. He took her coins, gave her the flour and salt, and let the silence in the store scream their disapproval. The only person who came up the mountain was Reverend Allen. He arrived a week after the fight, his horse looking tired. He brought a sack of potatoes and a jar of his wife's pickled beets. Eli was on the porch, whittling. He did not get up. He just watched the preacher dismount. "Mr. Thorne," the preacher said, nodding. He looked at Clara, who stood in the repaired doorway. "Ma'am, I am glad to see you are recovering, Eli." Eli's knife paused. "You stopped a killing, preacher. You are welcome here." It was the most he had ever said to the man. Reverend Allen sat on the steps, his hat in his hands. "The town is unsettled. Langley's shoulder is mending, but his pride is not. The sheriff has been removed. The territory sent a new man, a marshal, but he is quiet. He is watching." "Let them watch," Eli said.
"They are calling you a savage,"
the preacher said softly, looking at Eli. "And they are calling her," he glanced at Clara. "They are using words that do not belong in a decent world."
"They are fools,"
Eli said. "They are," the preacher agreed.
"But they are frightened fools. They do not understand. They see a man who lives by his own law, and a woman who has survived what they could not. It makes them feel small, and small men are dangerous."
He visited often after that. He would sit with Eli, and they would talk. Or rather, the preacher would talk. Of the Bible, of the town, of the growing nation. And Eli would listen, offering a rare, sharp comment that cut to the heart of the matter. The preacher began to look at Clara with a deep, abiding respect. He saw the way she cared for Eli, the way her presence had softened the cabin, the way she had turned this refuge into a home. While Eli mended, Clara's garden grew. The small green shoots pushed through the dark, cold mud with a defiant, impossible life. She tended them with the same fierce care she had given Eli. She watered, she weeded, she protected them. It was a patch of hope, a promise that life could, and would, go on. Her skill with words, which had been a liability in St. Louis, became a strange, quiet currency. It began with the preacher. He knew of a woman in his congregation, a young German immigrant, who had not heard from her family in the old country in over a year. She was sick with worry, and she could not write in English. "Would you, Mrs.
Thorne?" he asked Clara one afternoon. He used the name Mrs. Thorne deliberately. Clara agreed. The woman, Anna, came up the mountain, her eyes wide with fear. She did not look at Eli. She sat at Clara's table and, in broken, tearful German and English, told her story. Clara listened, and then she wrote. She took the woman's raw, aching words and spun them into a clean, clear letter, full of love and longing. The woman wept when she read it back. She had no money. She offered Clara a small sack of fresh eggs. Clara took them. The next week, another woman came. Her son had gone to work on the railroad in California, and she had not heard from him. She brought a small bolt of blue cotton cloth. Clara wrote the letter. Slowly, quietly, the women of promise began to make the trek up the mountain. They came with their small offerings: a hen, a jar of honey, a set of mended wool socks. They came to the woman they had scorned, the whore, because she was the only one who could give voice to their hearts. They would sit at her table, and Eli would sit on the porch, his rifle always clean, always close. His presence was a silent warning. This was a place of business. This was a place of respect. The women who came were protected here, just as Clara was. Clara's name in town was still a slur, but in the quiet homes of the women, it became something else. It became synonymous with a skilled hand, a kind ear, and a safe silence. She was earning her place, not by asking, but by giving. One night, near dusk, they heard a sound from the trail. It was not a horse. It was someone on foot, stumbling, sobbing. Eli was on his feet, rifle in hand, before Clara had even reached the door. He stood in the shadows of the porch. A girl fell into the clearing. She could not have been more than 16. Her dress was torn, her hair a wild mat of dirt and leaves. She saw the cabin light and staggered toward it, collapsing onto the newly built steps. "Please," she wept, her voice a raw whisper. He said you was safe." Clara ran to her, kneeling in the dirt. She lifted the girl's face. One eye was swollen shut, a dark, ugly purple. Her lip was split. Clara's blood went cold. She remembered the merchant's soft hands, his hard fist. She looked at the bruises on the girl's throat. "Who did this?" Clara's voice was a low, dangerous hiss. My stepfather," the girl choked. Please do not send me back. He will kill me." Clara looked at Eli, who stood like a stone guardian in the doorway. His face was dark with a rage she knew well. He said nothing. He just stepped back, holding the door open. Clara wrapped her arms around the girl. "You are not going back," she said. "You are home." She brought the girl in, bathed her wounds, and gave her the pallet by the fire. She sat with her all night, holding her hand, as the girl slept the sleep of the utterly broken. Eli sat on the porch, his rifle across his knees. He did not sleep. He watched the trail. No one came. The girl's name was Sarah. She did not leave. She was quiet, terrified of Eli at first, but she slowly began to heal. She helped Clara in the garden. She learned to cook. She was the first. A month later, a widow, Mrs. Gable, arrived. Her husband's brother had taken the farm, claiming she had no legal right, and had turned her out with nothing but the clothes on her back. She was proud, and she was starving. "I am not asking for charity," she said. Her hands nodded. "I can work. I can sew." "Then you will sew," Clara said, and she made a bed for her in the corner. The cabin became something new. It was no longer a fortress for two. It was a refuge. It became a known place, whispered about among the women who had no other place to go. Runaways from cruel husbands, widows with no standing, castaways, like Clara herself, who had been deemed not the town's problem. The cabin was loud. It was crowded. Eli built 2 more bunks into the walls. He hunted for more mouths. He said little.
But he moved with a new purpose. He was no longer just surviving. He was the protector of this strange, broken family. One clear afternoon, when the garden was in full, glorious bloom, Clara was picking wildflowers. She gathered bluebells and yellow prairie dandelions and white yarrow. She wove them into a small circle. She found Eli by the creek, sharpening his axe. He heard her approach and stopped. She stood before him, the ring of flowers in her hand. She was not the same woman who had stepped off the stagecoach. Her skin was brown from the sun, her hands calloused. She was strong. "We lied to the preacher," she said, her voice clear. He looked at her. "Yes, I do not want to lie anymore," she said. She held out her hand. On the table, that morning, she had placed the 2 rings, his mother's tarnished silver, and her mother's plain gold. He had looked at them, looked at her, and had closed his large hand around the small gold one. He understood. He took the gold ring from his pocket. "The preacher," he began. "No," she said. "Just us, under the tree, just us." They stood under the great pine that shaded the cabin. The other women, Sarah and Mrs. Gable, watched from the porch, their faces soft. They did not have a Bible. They did not have fine words. Eli took her hand. He slid the small, plain gold band onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "I ain't got much," he whispered, repeating the words he had said in the winter, but they meant something new. "But what I got, it's yours. My name, my home, my life. It's yours. Clara, it was always yours." She took his mother's ring, the tarnished silver one. She took his large, scarred hand and slid it onto his smallest finger. It did not fit. It was a woman's ring. He curled his hand into a fist, holding it. "I came with nothing," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I needed a home, and you gave me one." She touched his face, the scar by his temple. "What I got, it is not much, either. My heart, my hands, the life you saved, they are yours. Eli, I will not let the darkness take you. I will be your light." He leaned down and kissed her. It was not the hesitant, fearful kiss of the winter. It was not the desperate, aching kiss of their first passion. It was a kiss of promise. It was slow, and it was sure. It tasted of pine and sunlight and forever. The town's annual spring fair was a large affair. It was a time for ranchers to trade stock, for the town to celebrate its survival. "We are going," Clara said. It was not a question. Sarah and Mrs. Gable were going with them, to sell the preserves they had made and the shirts Mrs. Gable had sewn. Eli nodded. "We are going." They rode down, not on one horse, but with a small wagon Eli had repaired. Eli walked beside it, his hand resting on the side, near Clara. He wore his good shirt. He was clean-shaven. When they arrived, the town stopped. It was not just Eli and Clara. It was their family, the outcasts, the strays. Eli walked openly beside Clara. He did not shield her. He presented her. They set up their small table. The whispers started immediately. "There they are. Look at them." All the strays together. A ranch hand, drunk early, swaggered over. He looked at Sarah, then at Clara. He spat on the ground near Clara's feet. "Heard you are collecting whores now. Thorn, starting a house up on the mountain." Clara felt the heat rise in her face. She felt the old, familiar shame. She looked down. Then she felt Eli's hand cover hers. She looked up at him. He was not looking at the rancher. He was looking at her. His eyes were steady. "You are mine. No lie changes that." Clara lifted her chin. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She stared back at the rancher, her gaze as cold and clear as the creek water. The rancher faltered. He saw no fear in her. He saw no shame. He saw a woman he could not break. He saw the man beside her, whose hand was resting on the knife at his belt. The rancher muttered, turned, and walked away. A man was watching them. He wore a clean duster and a new hat, and a star pinned to his vest. He was the new marshal. He had watched the entire exchange. He walked over. Clara's breath caught, but the man did not look at the rancher. He looked at Eli. He looked at their table of goods. He looked at the women. Then he tipped his hat. He nodded, a single, sharp gesture of respect. "Mr. Thorne," he said. "Ma'am." He turned and walked on. It was not forgiveness. It was not acceptance. It was something more. It was acknowledgement. The law, which had once sided with men like Dyer, had just nodded to them. Times were changing, slow as rain. That night, the cabin was quiet. The women were asleep. The moon was a bright, silver coin, flooding the clearing with light. Clara sat on the porch, in the chair he had built for her hands resting in her lap. The garden was a dark, thriving shadow, smelling of damp earth and corn. She heard him come out. He did not sit in his own chair. He sat on the step beside her, leaning his back against the post. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth of his shoulder. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the stars, which looked close enough to touch. Down in the valley, the lanterns of promise burned, small, distant, and unimportant. Eli reached out. He did not take her hand. He placed his large, rough palm on her belly. He held it there, his touch reverent, his head bowed. She was growing, with his child. A tear slid down her cheek. She was not sad. She was full. She whispered, her voice part of the night air, "I needed a home, and I found a world." He turned his head. He lifted her hand from her lap and pressed his lips to her calloused knuckles. A rough, reverent kiss. They sat in silence, watching the stars and the lanterns burn in the dark. Thank you for listening to our story. Please comment where you are listening from to connect with other fans. And we invite you to subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel and share your thoughts in English